Shout out to Unity for sponsoring this video, they are amazing. And once again my patrons voted and we are going to see something crazy, which is how to create a ground slash. The idea is that this pierces to the ground, opening up the ground with a slash. And the cool thing is that this will adapt to any terrain, to any ground below it. Cool, right? This is a very complex technique, but I tried my best to explain you the basis, so I hope you enjoy it. And by the way, this is all available on my Patreon page. You get access to this project and many others that you can use in your games. Plus, you keep the channel running. Links below. And our sponsor today is Unity. They have some awesome sales in the Unity Asset Store, and it's that time of the year where you can acquire some AAA assets for your games or for your projects, such as these ones that you are seeing. I think it's a great way to improve the workflow of your game and to have a better result when developing in such a complex industry. So make sure to check that out, I left some links below. You can also use this code right here to have an extra 10% off of your next purchase, so make sure to use it when you are checking out. So as you guys can see, there's quite a few things going on. We have a mesh, we have some code, so this properly follows the terrain below. And I'm going to show you pretty much all the elements you need to create this effect. So let's start by creating the mesh. And for that part I'm going to use Blender 3.0, by the way. So let's start by selecting everything with A and pressing delete, so we have a clean scene. We want to press Shift A to add a Bezier curve. I'm gonna press 7 in the numpad, so we go to the top view, and I'm going to rotate it -90 degrees in the Z axis, and then we can press Tab to enter in edit mode. And I'm gonna select this handle right here, and all we gotta do is push it more or less around here. As you can see, we have kind of a slash shape. If you go right here to the Bezier tab, in the geometry drop down menu, we can extrude an amount of 0.3 more or less. That's enough. And that's when we start seeing something. Let's go to object mode, and from here we can convert this to a mesh with Alt C. And by pressing tab we can go to edit mode, and with Ctrl R we can add an edge loop right in the middle. Press escape so it stays in place. While holding Shift and Alt, I'm going to select this vertex, and I'm gonna go again to the top view with 7 in the numpad and push it with G locked in the X axis. More or less this amount. As you can see, we have some thickness right now. I'm gonna scale this down with S and lock it in the Z. We don't need this to be so thick. And then we can take care of the UVs by creating a new window. Drag this corner down here on the left. And on the top left corner, we can go ahead and select UV editor. And if we press on this little icon with 2 arrows, we can now select this vertex up here with B. And in the right window, we can see which vertex we have selected. And in this case, it means we need to rotate this. Select everything in the UV editor and rotate it -90 degrees. So basically these vertices are on the left. And if we select this vertex on the right, as you can see, we have the bottom edge loop, and we want to go ahead and in the UV drop down menu turn on constraint to image bounds. This will allow us to push all of these vertices with G, lock it in the X, push it all the way to the left until it overlaps with the other vertices. And since these vertices on the mid represent the front of our slash, we can push this all the way to the right, just like this. This way we can create a gradient texture and the front of the slash will be brighter. UVs are extremely important to map a texture properly. Now if you want, you can go ahead and shape a little bit this until it looks a little bit better. In my case, I'm gonna push this vertex to the left so it becomes thinner at the top and a little bit thicker towards the bottom. Oh, and by the way, these 2 vertices right here, you can scale them down in the Z axis. You can press 0 and then enter until they are overlapped. I think it will look a little bit nicer. Okay, so once you have a shape that you like and that you are pleased with, we can go ahead and let me just get out of see-through mode by pressing Z, and with spacebar I'm gonna go ahead and search for Shade Smooth. You can find it up here as well in the object drop down menu, and this will make it look a little bit nicer. From here we can export this in the file drop down menu as an FBX. Make sure you rename it, and up here you turn on selected objects, so you export only the slash. From there, if we go back to our Unity project, and this project was created with Unity 2021.2.7 in the Universal Render Pipeline, all we gotta do now is select the mesh, and in the scale factor let's increase it to 100, because Blender by default exports this in a really small size. You can press apply down here, and to build this effect we are going to need an empty game object, so let's go ahead and create one. Make sure you reset the transform, and then in one of your folders, with right click you can create a visual effect graph. Rename it and parent this to the empty we just created. Just make sure you reset the transform of this VFX graph, and then you can press the edit button to open this window. You can dock it wherever you want. For the slash, we simply need one particle each time, right? So we can use a single burst up here in the spawn area with a count of 1. We want this to move but via script, so we don't need the set velocity block. Let's just say the lifetime is 3 seconds for now. And down here, what really matters is that we change the output particle quad to a output particle mesh. Let's delete the other one, and in here we can assign the slash we created. Okay, so from here, as you can see, first thing you will notice is that this is super small. And that's because we need a set size down here in the output particle mesh. We can say it's 1. Okay, so we got something, we just need to rotate this properly. Up here in the initialize particle we can use a set angle, which is 90 for the Y and for the Z. And now this will face properly the Z axis. What's happening here is that we cannot see the inside of the mesh. Let me just increase the lifetime of this to 10 seconds. Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, it's super simple. If we select the output particle mesh down here, in the inspector, in the cull mode, instead of default we can turn it off. And now Unity will render the front and the back faces of this mesh. Cool. Another problem that's happening right now is that we kinda need to adjust the pivot. We simply need to use a set pivot and say the X is around -0.8, -1, that's okay, as long as it is above ground and the pivot of this object is touching the ground. So as you can see, it's facing the forward axis, the blue axis. That's exactly what we need. You can also turn on soft particles, by the way, which means that if it touches geometry, it will fade a little bit the mesh. And let's do a few more things with this before we create a texture. You could also create a shader. If you go watch some of my videos, you will probably be able to create a nice shader for this. So with the set size over life, we can control how this slash is animated. We first need to say the composition is multiply, otherwise it will overwrite any previous value. We can use this curve, but the first key, let's say it's a little bit above 0.5, around 0.5, okay? And let's go ahead and say the lifetime is not random, because 10 seconds is way too much and 2 seconds is enough. By the way, if you don't see any changes whenever you are adjusting these values, make sure to press compile up here and it will update your VFX graph. So as you can see, it grows a little bit. And this will add a nice touch down the road. Okay, so another thing we can do is use the set scale. You can adjust the scale of the slash however you want. What matters is that we use a set color, so we can choose, for example, an orange and increase the intensity as well. So yeah, the texture is horrible, this one. So let's create a new one. I'm gonna use Krita because it's free. The idea is to create a new file, a square file. In this case, I'm using 2048 by 2048, which is way too much. Anyway, we are going to need a gradient. So let's click up here and select this first gradient. It's really important that it goes from foreground to transparent, because if we press edit now, we can say that the color is going to be white of the first key. and yeah, let's select color, and the opacity is 0, but for the last key the opacity is 100 and the color is white. And now we simply need to select the gradient tool and click and hold from left to right. So it creates this nice gradient. We can hide the background and then export this as a PNG to our Unity project. Now if you go back to Unity, you can select the texture and turn on Alpha's transparency and then press apply. And now in VFX Graph, in the main texture, we can assign the texture we just created. And that's it. That's the simplest way to add a nice touch to this slash. Oh, and if you have this problem right here and see this artifact, this means you need to go to your texture and say that the wrap mode is clamp, and then press apply, and they will go away. Okay, so nice. This is looking like something we can work with. Oh, and to fade this out, we can use a set color of a life, by the way, and for the gradient, we simply need to make sure that it goes from white to black and the last key is transparent, just like this. And let's not forget to set the composition to multiply as well as the alpha composition. And here we go, it fades out towards the end. Really cool. Now let's see how we can leave a trail on the ground with a decal, and for that we can start with the simple particle system. But we only want this to emit whenever this object moves. Fortunately, we have the spawn over distance, at least in this version, Unity 2021. And for the position, we need to change the space. There's literally a block that does it, and we can say the target space is world. And now every time we move this object, we emit particles. That's great, that's super useful. Let's just set the rate per unit to 4, that's enough. And well, we don't need velocity. And if we want this to actually leave a trail, we need to set the whole particle system to world. We can click here, but if you try to move it, the particles will be in the origin of the world. And it's an easy fix. We simply need a set position. Make sure it's L in here instead of W. And now, ta-da! Every time we move this, we leave a trail of particles. Great! Let's take care of the aspect by completely removing this particle quad because we want a forward decal. By the way, decals are really basic in VFX Graph, at least for now. They are going to have great improvements. And for the simplicity's sake of this tutorial, we are going to use the default particle that comes with Unity. You can control the size with the set size. We can actually make sure it's random, by the way, between something like 1.75 and 2, and set the color to black. This is the black decal. We simply need to fade this out with a set color of a life. The gradient, it's the same as the previous one, it fades towards the end. But if you try to move this, it's very strange. What's happening here is that we need to rotate each particle 90 degrees in the X. And now it will be parallel to the ground. Oh, and let's not forget to set the color of a life, the composition to multiply. Great. From here we can actually copy this output particle for an orange decal, so it looks like it's burning the ground, basically. We can decrease the size to something like 0.75 and 1.3. And the color, you can choose a orange color, increase the intensity, it will look nice. And now here we go, we have an orange trail in the ground. Good. Let's see how we can use this in terms of code. Just so you can have an idea, I have in my scene a camera, and to this camera I have attached a character controller. You can add down here in component, and a first person control script. Well, basically you can copy it. This is all over the web. It's simply to move a character in a first person perspective. Another thing important for you is the ground slash shooter. Another script attached here, so we can shoot projectiles in a first person perspective. This script is adapted from this tutorial that I made a while back. Basically the idea here is we check if we have pressed the fire button, in this case the left mouse button. We call the shoot projectile function, which will shoot a ray from the center of the camera towards infinite. We get a point 1000 units in that ray forward, and we instantiate a projectile. Basically, we instantiate the ground slash. In that ground slash, we have a ground slash script, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And it's very important that we rotate this to the destination. As you can see, we only rotate in the y-axis, the x and z axis do not move. And then we add velocity to the rigid body. We multiply the forward axis, which is the blue axis, by a certain speed from the ground slash. So that's how we shoot the ground slash. In the ground slash, we have the script and a rigid body. So let's add one to our ground slash. Let's add a rigid body. You can disable the gravity, by the way. And then we can create a new script, call it ground slash. In my case, I've already done it. In here, we have a speed, a slowdown rate, so it stops, a detecting distance, so it detects the ground. It's a ray shooting to the ground, and a destroy delay. Then we get the rigid body and a boolean to know if it has stopped moving. As soon as this is instantiated, we set the y value to 0 of the position, so it snaps to the ground. Then we get the rigid body, and we call a coroutine a slow down coroutine, so it slows down the ground slash. Basically, we lerp the velocity until it reaches 0. What's also super important is in the fixed update. If it hasn't stopped, then we keep on shooting a ray from this distance, by the way, perpendicular to the ground, and if it hits something, we set the y position of the ground slash to that specific hit point. Otherwise, we set it to 0. In my scenario, it works well. But as soon as it detects a collider, it will snap to that collider, and it will follow the geometry of the ground, which is super nice. So let's see this in action. Once you have all of those scripts, in my case, I'm going to assign to the ground slash shooter the camera and the projectile. So yeah, we need to create a prefab out of the ground slash we created, and then assign it to the projectile of the ground slash shooter script. Assign the fire point, which is basically an empty game object. And once you test this out, you are shooting projectiles like crazy. This is only happening because if we go to our prefab, the ground slash, the speed is way too high, 14 is enough, slowdown rate should be faster, like 0.1. And for the detecting distance, you can set it to 3 and not 0.15. And once you test it out, oh yeah, don't forget to turn off use gravity in the rigid body. Okay, so yeah, as you can see now, it's very interesting what's happening here. It's following the ground. I mean, you can do a bunch of things with this, we are going to see, but I can only show you the most important parts. Like for example, let's see how we can add some debris to this. So if you go back to your Blender file, you can go to edit, and in preference, in add-ons, you can search for cell fracture, turn it on. And then we need to add the cube with Shift A, and with spacebar I'm gonna go with cell fracture, which you can find in objects, quick effects. This panel shows up, and we can increase the source limit above 10. Recursive, we can set it to 1, and it's important that we set the noise to 1, and then we can press OK. And we get a fractured cube, which means now you can select 1 or 2 debris from here and delete everything else. Once you have these 2 debris, what's important is that you select them and you press Ctrl A to apply the rotation and scale. From here now you can select both of these debris, go to File, and in the Export select FBX and export this to your Unity project. Turn on selected objects, don't forget about it, or otherwise you will export the slash as well. Okay, and now back in Unity, we can say that debris, the scale factor is 100. We can start by copying the black and orange decal, the whole particle system. We can remove the 2 output particle decals, and since we want a mesh, we can use the output particle mesh. And by the way, in this new version, you can control how many meshes you want to use, you want to output. I'm going to increase it to 2 and assign the debris we created. At this point you could create a nice texture so it matches your ground or whatever you are using this. In my case, I'm simply going to say this is opaque and remove the main texture, none. And for example, say the color is random between a dark gray and a light gray. So basically it matches the ground I have. We can also control the set size, make it random between 0.1 and 0.66. Towards the end of the lifetime of this debris, we want this to disappear, so we can use a set size over life, and we can use this curve, push the first key to more or less around 0.5, 0.4, so it shrinks towards the end. Okay. If we move this, we get something already, but as you can see, we need to add randomness and motion. We can take care of that up here in the set angle. We can say it's random, between 360 and minus 360 in all of the axes. And the simple set velocity will do the trick for the motion. We can say it's random. Between 2 in the X and Z and minus 2 for the maximum of the X and Z. And for the Y, we can say 0.5 and 3. So it adds force upwards. And a strange phenomena happens if you move this around. We are missing gravity, right? So let's add it to the update particle. If we move it, you will notice that they fall through the ground. So we need to tell VFX Graph that this is going to collide with a plane. Collisions in VFX Graph are simple for now. In here, we want to say the bounce is 0.2 and the friction 0.8, so it stops moving. As you can see, it's looking very nice. We can increase up here the rate per unit to 15 and increase the capacity to 250. Oh, and last thing, we need to set the size of our life to multiply the composition. Alright, and we are ready to test this out. So, as you can see, every time we fire this up, we are piercing the ground and leaving some debris, a nice orange trail. And we can do many things with this. That's exactly what I did. I added a few more elements. I added these trails, by the way, which I used a tutorial that I made recently, which is the stylized trail, and it's quite useful. And you can add particles, you can add fire from this tutorial as well that I created, stylized fire. It's really up to you. You have the basis now, and from there you can improve this. This entire project is available on my Patreon page, and by supporting me, you allow me to keep on creating free tutorials for everyone, and it would be super much appreciated. A big thank you goes to each patron for supporting me, and as usual, a quick shout out to the top tier patrons, which are Alak Frost, Bradford Arendt, Krubidubidub, Daniel Adcock, David Daka, David Mydlars, Derek Benson, Donald Thompson, Edward Chai, Erickson Talau, Eric Hudson, FT92, Goblin Plague, Leonardo Farage, Little Tsai, Maxim, Mograph Tech, Nat Sims, Oitsk, Radioactive Bullfrog, Revenant Game, Stefan Zarkov, Verizuta, and Ingu Das. Your support is very much appreciated, guys. You keep the channel going, and I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks, bye.